Bubba built it.
All right, hey guys, it's part 3 of
Howdy.
Horse Force.
Part 3.
As we left off.
West Coast.
Oh no! Don't do that.
Sorry.
Don't do that. I asked you if you had all that stuff out of your system.
Okay, start again.
All right, part 3, Horse Force. So last week we left off.
We're not starting over.
I thought we just did.
Oh. Okay, go.
All right, part 3. Part 3, Horse Force. Hey guys.
Howdy.
Last week as we left off, you saw us driving, or not driving.
No, you saw a representation of what might happen if someone drove a vehicle with no doors or seats or roof, or
what could have possibly
what
happened.
might have happened. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not sure if it really happened.
Not really sure, but as you see, when you do a body swap, you cut a lot of stuff off of it, take a lot of stuff off, and you're left with a bunch of parts.
Yeah, so again, we really are invested in this whole body swap idea because it is such a great way of building a custom car. You're taking the cast-offs or the undervalued aspects of one thing, and you're combining it with the undervalued or an unrestorable shell or some other thing, and you're taking and making way more than the sum of their parts. Anyway, so there's a lot of great advantages monetarily to the body swap. And one of the things Lee just mentioned, he brought up, was the parts for sale, because we didn't even mention that in our last video, but we had a lot of cool parts for sale on top of the little amount that we had already invested.
Yeah, we sold the tail lights. We sold, what else did we sell off of it?
The xenon headlights. We sold some trim pieces that other people needed. We sold some interior trim, things like door handles, and I mean, there's a lot of little parts that go wrong on cars. And we still have more things. And then on top of that, and I didn't even tell you this, we sold the rear end, the 9-inch, for $200 out of the Mustang. So
that's,
I mean,
awesome.
So literally, so now we were at 500. We're literally at 300 on that now. So
yeah.
So lots of great parts for sale, and so it keeps other cars on the road. And we didn't ruin the one that we bought. We just transformed it into something else. Another one of the big advantages of the modern. What other advantages can we talk about?
Well, one of the things you're talking about is the modern chassis, how it's wide. It's got a nice wide platform.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of the classic vehicles, you know, they're much narrower. In fact, I've got a 53 Ford, and we ended up putting that on an F-150 frame,
Right.
a four-wheel drive F-150 frame. And I've always been shocked when you get inside that cab.
How narrow it is. I mean,
You're like this right here,
Yeah,
and there's just no room, you know, and that's always been shocking for me. But
yeah, so when you're talking about width, though, the other big thing about a modern chassis is generally the offset of the wheels. It's designed for a very positive offset wheel. So you're talking a 35 millimeter, 45 millimeter offset. So in other words, it's the face of the wheel is very even with the outside of the tire. And with a classic car, with a hot rod especially, you want to have, you know, a beefy dish
Nice
to it,
dish.
and yeah. And so when you do that, when you couple. So it's a problem if you're wanting to tuck everything underneath, but we love making stuff wider.
yes,
So,
yeah, wider is better.
Wider is better for sure. And so if you're wanting to do that, then it doesn't cost cubic dollars to have some ridiculous offset wheel. You just buy a standard offset wheel like for an older car.
Yeah, right. And on Horse Force, what we ended up having with everything, as you'll see in the pictures and video here, is a whopping almost, well, it was more than 8 inches for sure.
Almost 9 inches.
Yeah.
So we took a 10-inch wheel that is the pretty common wheel. It's a torque thrust. It's American Racing. We've done several wheels through American Racing, and we like
Yeah.
them because it's really they
got a
invest in
great style.
classic style. Yeah, it is the same basic wheel that you would have seen on an old Shelby race car, and so we chose that also because it was very economical.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely it was. And then, so what did we go with on the tires again? I can't remember.
Okay, so I really wanted to run a square setup, which means the same on all four corners. It's so much easier when you can do that. And so the most inexpensive 15-inch square tire that you can buy is a 295 50-15. And so the first thing I did was take some 295 50-15s, I bought 2 of them, put them on the rear, see if they looked right. And if you've noticed in the video, we had some really old cool chrome slots with these old bias ply Firestones on them, and they're awesome and they're beautiful. and we got them for free from a friend, and they're brand new, but they're old. Anyway, all that being said, I really loved the stance that they had.
Yeah, it was very, very cool, but ultimately, we just didn't feel confident running them down the street.
No, they were too old probably to run down the street. So, and the 295s, I looked them up, they were close, but they were smaller and they weren't quite as wide, so we're like, well, let's just see if it'll work, and it would not work.
Yeah.
So we had to spend some big bucks on a drag radial, and I won't go into the brand, but it was a 325 50-15, and that had the meat that we needed. And we did run 295s on the front, so it's a beefy tire setup. But once again, if you cheap out in this area, you'll have the wrong stance, and stance is king with this kind of thing.
It's the foundation of the entire vehicle, and it's where we typically start whenever we're doing a build. We want to get that nailed down before we proceed to go any further. And it's important, especially if you're doing a wide body, because you got to know how far you're actually going to go with your custom flares.
Yeah, so it's really the first thing you have to have nailed down. And of course, if you do the wrong thing in this regard, if you cheap out, it's going to look like your car skipped leg day. Yeah. And or like the Tasmanian devil, rabbit sandwich.
Or the orange monster on Looney Tunes.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, we digress. So of course, with us, it's so important about the tires because that's what we do. We make tire graphics. As you can see there.
Yeah.
And of course, our graphics on these tires look amazing. We went with a very big, bold graphic here.
Billboard style lettering.
And it just pops. I mean,
time out for gratuitous plug here, but dollar per dollar, you already have the right stance, you already have the right wheels and tires. There's not a better modification you can do that has more visual punch than our product. And we also, we do a stencil kit as well that's a reusable, we call it our super stencil, and then the glue on adhesive type permanent rubber letters.
Yeah, and dollar for dollar, man, what an impact. You just don't find anything that will do
when they're not on there than when they are. It really makes a huge difference. So anyway, back to the time.
Sorry about that.
Gratuitous plug over with. So the other thing though, we talked about all the benefits. There was one big issue. And like we said, there's always going to be issues with these things. Every one of these swaps is you're taking two things that were never meant to be together and putting them together. But in particular, the biggest issue that we dealt with on this is the fact that in the 90s especially, car companies really were just in love with this cab forward design where the windshield rate goes way over. Or if you remember, a fourth gen Camaro, where literally half the engine when you open the hood is covered up by windshield.
Yeah, whereas on the Mach 1 Mustang, you have a very long hood and the cab is way, way back from the front of the car.
Yeah, so long hood, short deck. So not only were we having to deal with the issues of cab forward and not putting on a standard type setup, but literally the Mustang was reversed from standard. It was actually the other way. And that was the biggest thing that we had to deal with. Now the good news about using a modern chassis that has this cab forward design is that a lot of that metal in the cowl that handles that is superfluous. So you can cut it away in most cases and it's not going to be a problem. But in our case, we had to do some other things to make it work.
You had to lose the dash. That was one downside. For sure.
So usually on one of these body swaps, you really want to keep the dash. It's one of the big, complicated things in a build. Yeah. Interior in general. I don't have anything against guys that are doing these high dollar cars, but we have a friend of ours, and I think that they dropped their car off to have the interior done. It was $35,000. And I mean, for us, that's just, that would stink to write that check.
Yeah, well then, you don't want to get in it. You certainly don't want your kids in it, right? I mean, they can.
You don't want to be eating a chili cheese dog in the front seat, or anyway.
No.
So we really love to find a car that has a decent interior, or at least a lot of elements of the interior that we can reuse, like our current project that we're working on.
Yeah, the Bronco.
Yeah, right. And but anyway, in this case, we were going to lose that dash, so we had to deal with that. So what we really did, we did the next best thing, which is use the Mustang dash.
Yeah, and it turned out really well, I thought.
It did, but it was not without its challenges, of course, right?
Right, and there's some pieces and parts that aren't perfect.
Right, well, again, and that build was supposed to be Mad Max meets Death Race, so the raw edge of it is okay.
Exactly.
But if you're trying to do something more refined, that is something you really need to consider. So the placement of that A-pillar, the placement of the doorpost, we might have a picture of this, but you can literally see where when we welded this thing up, that the Mustang door posts literally welded behind the existing posts.
Yeah, we do have some pictures.
So it was literally that far back.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that created some egress issues that we also had to deal with in the ergonomics with the steering wheel. We had to space the steering wheel out.
And then go with a deeper dish steering wheel to get us further away, because otherwise it was going to be right up against the windshield of the Mach 1.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not going to work.
No, but as far as this merger went, the chassis is a great choice, and the width of the two was nicely done. And as we talked about wheelbase, now I think we really already handled that, but
yeah, but one of the things that was actually surprising is it fit like a glove. I mean, we pulled it right.
Driving right
yeah,
underneath
Michael
there.
just drove it right up underneath the Mach 1 frame, and we dropped that down. It was very nice. However, what was shocking and surprising is whenever we got done with that, how much of the Mark VIII was sticking out from the rear. I mean, it was how much?
it was over 12 inches.
12 inches.
About 14 inches maybe of junk in the trunk sticking out.
Yeah, and that junk we actually had to use because we needed it, because obviously, as you saw in the last video, there's really nothing back there of Mach 1 to
There was
use.
nothing left. Yeah, so it was the terminus or the termination of the unibody, and it's structurally it did not have to be there, but structurally you needed to be there from the
something.
standpoint of capping the end of the car.
Yeah, where's the car going to end?
So we cut this much out and moved it in and welded it up again.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it worked out very nicely, as you'll see in the video here.
It really
It's
did.
really, I mean, I was very, very impressed with the work that he did on that one. So let's talk about the wide body now on that rear, making those panels.
So we wanted a wide body, and when you're looking at how you're going to wide body, there's not just one way. There's multiple ways of doing it. We spent a lot of time over the years looking at old race cars and seeing how they did it. So if you're going to break it down into some basics, you could say that the most simple wide body would be the flare, right?
Just a bolt-on flare.
And some people would say that's not even a wide body, but I would contend that it is. I mean, where are you going to draw the line on what the flare is? But so the bolt-on flare perhaps is like the basics of wide body. Then the other next idea is to take the original fenders and box them out with some extra metal. And so you're literally taking it, just moving it out, and there's a big intake. And I love that raw essence of that.
That's what we did on Scraptona.
Yeah, and what we did on Transland basically as well. We took the stock pieces and moved them out. Also on Ruckus truck, we employed that method, and it's a great way to do it. You're using a lot of stock pieces. Then the other way, and it's more complex, is to take and literally coat bottle flare the whole thing out.
Yeah,
and
that's what we did on Force.
We thought, you know what, let's just see if we can do it. So we really jumped out into the deep end of the pool. Started out with the easiest part, which was the back, and did that long cut similar to what we had done on the Scraptona. Yep. And so the idea is you take and you just cut. And one of the things that we did is that, so there was already a little bit of a shelf there from the rear end as it merged into the C-pillar, but it died out about halfway into the C-pillar. And we just took that same line, and when we cut it all the way to the door panel, or to the door post, and then we moved all that out. And so we created these shoulders that weren't there before.
Yeah, and then of course you've got to fill in on the top with some metal.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, again, this is a budget build, so we're not going to go buy sheet metal, especially when we already have some laying
Sheet
around.
metal is almost $200 a sheet, depending on what you're buying. I mean, come on, that's crazy.
Right, and so hey,
we had acres of it out back.
Yeah, we've got lots of sheet metal laying around. It's just not in the most pristine form. And so one of the things that we had laying around were some fluorescent can lights, or
we had gone and changed out all of our old lights from fluorescent to LED sometime, and you don't throw away sheet metals. We had stacks of
those light fixtures.
Right.
And so, as you'll see in the picture there, made some templates, laid them up against it, traced it out, and then cut the pieces that we need to fill in on the wide body section there, and then tacked them in and welded them up.
So when I cut that and we spaced it out, then we noticed that everything, that the top did not lay back over the way we wanted it to. So then we realized we were going to have to wedge cut. So literally had to cut the top. We moved it out where we wanted it, where it was going to cover the wheels and tires, and then we had to add wedges in, pie cuts, to let it lay back in. And so that was our first sort of soiree in realizing this is not going to be so simple. And I've seen that employed. Obviously, you look at it and it tells you what it needs to be, what it needs to do. You kind of have to be the metal. But I've seen that employed sometimes with chopping the. Say that fast all the time.
Chopping the top.
Chopping the top on a hot rod, they would employ that. So anyway, that was the secret sauce, sort of. And also, like when you're dealing with a corner, you need something to reinforce that generally. So what we used was some small round bar, like it was 3/16 maybe round bar,
yeah.
And bent it to where we need it and brought the metal to that on both sides. So that is a good one. Is also another good one is conduit.
Yeah.
And you know, it's inexpensive to buy new. We also had a lot of old conduit laying around that we've used as well on our builds.
Took out of our building.
Yeah. But we used some conduit on this, and we'll get into that in a later video, I guess, on the front end.
Yeah, sure. But
yeah. So the front, right?
Yeah. Wide bodying it.
So already the back did not go quite as I had planned, although we did figure it out.
It worked very well.
But the front was a whole other story. So if you remember the back it's very smooth, slab-sided. All you had is the one arch to deal with. Well, on the front, you've got this spear that runs the whole length from basically right into the door,
yeah.
Into the fender, and it is raised at some points as much as 1.5 inches. So it's this really beautiful peak. Front fenders are very sculpted. They're beautiful, actually.
Well, they are now. See,
Well,
again, before it was just very flat on the side profile of it. It did raise up,
yeah.
but it was flat on the side. So what you have to do is make sense now, taking that flat side and bringing it up and making it meet this right here. And that was the challenge right there.
Well, that and the fact that there was no way it was going to do that without cutting it into 1,000,000 pieces. So it was one of those Humpty Dumpty moments where you're like, okay, here we go. We're cutting into this thing. And, you know, if you had to replace one of these fenders, it would probably cost you. The fact is that $500 Mark I's aren't just sitting and, you know, growing on trees. So,
they're not.
So you do this and you're like, well, at least it's just a $500 car. But the first thing we did was cut the whole length all the way across the top, right where the ridge, where they peak together. And then we had this teardrop opening that we're going to have to fill. And this is what we did, where we actually used some prior knowledge that we'd used on the Trans Land, which
And
was,
Ruckus Truck, too.
and Ruckus Truck, actually, yeah, which was a cheap little less than $200 English wheel that fits in a vise. And we cut these teardrop panels out of light fixture.
Yep.
And we've got pictures of that, I think. And they're this flimsy piece of teardrop metal. And you run it through the right dies in that
English wheel,
and all of a sudden it just goes. There's this moment where it's
super
just
strong,
and all of a sudden it's this piece of cupped, you know, beautifully contoured metal, and we welded that in there. But again, none of that was going to occur without me cutting entirely the wheel lip out, right?
Right.
And then having to cut the whole fender into 3 sections. And it's amazing that it went back together at all. And I'll admit that my metal work is crude on that. But what I was really pleased with is that
it's good.
Well, I'm getting better, but it was not quite to the smoothness that I would like. But there's not a lot of Bondo in it. But the thing is, we really did achieve that shape.
Yes.
And it was just gorgeous. And when it finally started to come together, it was one of these moments where it was like, yes. It's kind of like the same moment when you first put the body on there and it becomes one car, you know.
It's just sweet. It's
right.
like, oh!
So that basically covers the wide body.
Yeah.
Just know that if you're dealing with sculpted panels, you're going to have to do a lot more cutting. You're going to have to take out as much sculpting as possible to make it work. But then I guess in the next video, what we will do the front and the rear details in the paint, right?
Yep.
And that will
Yep.
basically finish us out, right?
Right, and then we'll cover our taking it to some shows, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, awesome. Well, hey guys, thank you so much again for
Appreciate
watching. We really appreciate it. Take a moment, subscribe to us, hit the like button, tell us if you like the video. If you don't like it, don't mention it.
Actually, they can tell us that.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us. All right.